Picture this. You wake up to the grinding roar of concrete mixers destroying a creek that's flowed behind your home since before the Civil War. The sound is so violent it rattles the kitchen windows, sending my coffee rippling in its mug like a mini earthquake. The smell of diesel exhaust and crushed limestone drifts through the morning air, thick enough to taste. By the time I grab my boots and step outside, the creek, my creek, is already half buried under gray slurry. Flood control. HOA President Brenda Hartwell calls it from her spotless white Tesla parked at the edge of the chaos. She's got that smug, realtor smile, the kind that says she's sure she's saving the neighborhood, even while she's murdering a piece of living history. She doesn't know she's just created a disaster that'll swallow her $1 million dream home whole. My name's Dale Brennan, 58 years old, retired Army Corps hydrologist, part-time mechanic, and full-time fool for thinking peace and quiet existed under an HOA. Until 6 months ago, my biggest worry was finding carburetor parts for a 1972 Harley Sportster. Now, I'm watching 80 grand of homeowner fees get dumped into what used to be a crystal-clear mountain stream called Cottonwood Creek. This land has been in my family since the 1940s, back when Willowbrook Valley was pasture land, and the only association around here was a herd of Angus. My grandfather, William Brennan, was a combat engineer who came home from Normandy and built his own little paradise. 2 acres of wild heaven with a creek running straight through it. He used to say, "Water's got a memory, Dale. You cage it, and it'll find its way out." Guess Brenda never heard that saying. Every morning before this mess, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and listen to Cottonwood Creek babble over granite stones. The air always smelled of wet willow bark and fresh motor oil from my workshop. My wife Martha, a 4th grade teacher with a saint's patience, would leave for school as the sunlight turned the water gold. That was our peace, our routine. Now all I hear are backhoes, shouting laborers, and the grind of rebar cutting through my family's legacy. The HOA called it a beautification and flood control project. What it really was, a vanity project dreamt up by a woman who couldn't tell a hydrologist from a hairdresser. Brenda Hartwell, age 52, moved here 2 years ago from California's Marin County with a white Tesla, designer sunglasses, and a sense of entitlement that could block out the sun. Her house, a $1, $2 million colonial monstrosity, sits right where the floodplain begins. When she took over the HOA board, she started acting like a self-appointed queen of the subdivision. I was the non-compliant serf because my property didn't fit her curated image of perfection. It started small. A violation notice about my unsightly automotive parts visible from neighboring properties. They were antique Harley engines, by the way, worth more than her Tesla tires. Then came the $200 a day fine for non-compliance. When I sent her a certified letter explaining that my property predates the HOA by 8 decades and isn't under their jurisdiction, she doubled down. Next thing I knew, a county inspector showed up at my door looking for evidence of illegal business operations. He found nothing but my organized chaos, a workshop full of oil-stained tools, shelves lined with history, and the smell of real work. Still cost me $1,200 in lawyer fees to clear it up. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a declaration of war. See, what Brenda didn't understand was that I knew this land better than anyone alive. I'd spent 3 decades with the Army Corps studying flood patterns, river behavior, and soil absorption rates. My creek was designed by nature and refined by my grandfather to absorb spring snowmelt like a sponge. But Brenda wanted straight lines, clean edges, and the kind of landscaping you see in glossy real estate brochures. So she hired Penton & Associates, a Denver law firm that specialized in what they called environmental property disputes. In plain English, that means legal bullying. They filed a complaint claiming my section of the creek caused dangerous runoff threatening the $1 million homes downstream. The legal papers came on a Thursday morning. 57 pages of gibberish accusing me of turning nature into a public hazard. Their demand? A $50,000 environmental study that could take 2 years. They figured I'd panic. Instead, I pulled out my grandfather's old surveyor's rod, waded into the creek, and started measuring flow myself. The water was cold, clean, and steady, like always. Martha came out with that worried look teachers wear when they know their students are about to do something stupid. "Dale," she said, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Brenda's fancy lawyers just made a $50,000 mistake." I called my old friend Pete Morrison from the Colorado Water Authority. 10 minutes later, he was laughing so hard he could barely talk. Turns out Brenda's legal team had based their case on 1967 watershed maps before half the subdivisions even existed. They might as well have used a hand-drawn treasure map from the gold rush. Pete sent me updated geological data showing that my stretch of Cottonwood Creek actually prevented flooding by naturally slowing water flow. Those granite boulders my grandfather laid by hand in 1953 weren't decoration. They were a flood control system decades ahead of its time. So I filed my counterclaim, attached all the updated surveys, expert analyses, and historical documentation proving that my property protected the entire valley. 2 weeks later, the county threw out the HOA's complaint entirely and validated my family's historical water rights. The headline in the local paper said it all. "HOA challenges 150-year-old creek, loses spectacularly." I should have celebrated. Martha made peach cobbler. But even as we sat on the porch watching the sunset shimmer over the creek, I knew Brenda wouldn't stop. She'd tasted humiliation, and people like her don't forgive that kind of wound. She was about to make her biggest mistake yet, one that would drown her empire in the same water she tried to bury. 3 weeks after the county ruled in my favor, Brenda called an emergency HOA board meeting. I didn't attend. I wasn't part of her kingdom, but I later found out what she'd done through my neighbor, Edwin Kowalski, a Polish retiree with a heart of gold and a hearing aid tuned perfectly for gossip. "Dale," he told me over the phone, his voice shaking. "This woman, she's crazy. She says flood will destroy everything unless we concrete your creek. She even shows pictures. But these pictures, they look fake, my friend, like someone dig holes just to take them." He was right. Turns out, Brenda had hired her cousin's landscaping company, not engineers, landscapers, to dig trenches along the creek and photograph them as erosion. Then she presented those pictures as evidence of imminent flooding. The HOA board voted 6-1 to approve a $127,000 emergency flood control project, paid through homeowner assessments. Only Edwin voted no. By the time Martha and I got back from visiting our daughter in Portland, it was already too late. The sound hit first, jackhammers and concrete mixers roaring where birds used to sing. Then the smell, diesel fumes, wet cement, crushed earth. The air was thick and gray, heavy with destruction. I rounded the corner to my driveway, and my stomach dropped. Cottonwood Creek was gone. In its place lay a hideous gray trench, a prison for water. They'd poured solid concrete over 150 years of natural beauty, burying my grandfather's hand-laid stones under a man-made scar that gleamed in the sun like an open wound. Water trickled weakly through a narrow gutter, its voice silenced. Martha stood beside me, trembling. "They killed it," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "They actually killed it." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt, I couldn't even find words. Just the sound of trucks backing up, the beeping, echoing off the valley walls like a funeral bell for everything good this place once was. But Brenda wasn't just arrogant, she was sloppy. Within 24 hours, I discovered that no one, not the county, not the state, not the EPA, had approved any permits for that project. They'd skipped every layer of regulation. In the world of environmental law, that's not a small mistake. It's a federal offense. I started digging, literally and legally. The company Brenda hired, Pinnacle Construction, already had 3 EPA violations for unauthorized waterway modifications. They'd been fined $75,000 in the past for dumping concrete into protected wetlands. She either didn't know or didn't care, so I documented everything. Photos, videos, flow measurements, timestamps. I even took water samples from the creek's runoff, where it met the new concrete. The pH levels were off the charts. Fish habitats, gone. Beaver dam, gone. The ecosystem my grandfather built and protected for 70 years, obliterated. That night, I filed formal complaints with the EPA, the Colorado Department of Environmental Protection, and the County Water Commissioner. Then I made one more call, to Trout Unlimited, a local conservation group. When I told them what happened, the chapter president nearly choked on the phone. "Sir," he said, "you're describing an active violation of the Clean Water Act. We'll help you. Legal counsel, environmental experts, witnesses, whatever you need." By Monday, I had a small army. 3 government agencies were investigating. An environmental law clinic at the University of Colorado offered pro bono representation. Reporters started calling after the first EPA team showed up at Brenda's front door. The HOA's perfect image was cracking like the foundation of a badly poured sidewalk. Meanwhile, Edwin kept feeding me updates from the inside. "Brenda is panicking," he whispered one night. "Now she says we must concrete whole creek, make it look official, so no one can say it is mistake." I almost laughed. "That's not a fix," I said. "That's suicide." And I was right. Because while Brenda and her board were busy covering their tracks with more concrete, I was going through my grandfather's old engineering notebooks. Yellowed pages, brittle edges filled with hand-drawn flowcharts and elevation maps. And buried in there, like a message from beyond the grave, was a 1973 report he'd written for the county, warning about this exact situation. In neat, faded ink, it said, "Concrete channeling in Cottonwood Valley will accelerate flood flow by 300%, threatening downstream structures." Downstream structures? Like Brenda's $1. 2 million house. I stayed up all night cross-referencing his calculations with modern weather data. My hands shook when I realized what it meant. The upcoming spring snowmelt, the heaviest in 2 decades, was going to turn that concrete trench into a high-pressure cannon aimed directly at the HOA homes. My property sat on higher ground. I'd be fine. But Brenda? She'd built her dream palace right in the floodplain my grandfather warned about 50 years ago. The irony was poetic. Still, I wasn't going to let her escape consequences. Not this time. With the help of a law student named Sarah Olivia, who was working her thesis on environmental corruption, I started compiling evidence, financial records, contractor invoices, and internal HOA meeting minutes. What she found made my blood run cold. Brenda hadn't just destroyed the creek. She'd embezzled nearly $90,000 from HOA funds through inflated contracts and fake consulting fees paid to companies she secretly owned. Fraud, environmental crimes, racketeering. The list was growing longer than the concrete trench outside my window. Sarah looked up from her laptop one afternoon and said, "Mr. Brennan, she didn't just break the law, she shattered it." That night, the mountain air felt colder than usual. I stood by what used to be the creek, listening to the trickle of water struggling through the gray channel. The smell of wet concrete lingered like guilt. Martha came out, resting her head on my shoulder. "You're going to fix it, aren't you?" she asked softly. I stared into the moonlit water and nodded. "Not just fix it. I'm going to make her regret ever touching it." Because Brenda thought she'd buried a creek, what she really buried was her own future. And when spring came, the flood wasn't just going to hit the valley, it was going to hit her life like a hammer from heaven. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, too fast. The weather reports called it a, quote, historic runoff season. I called it karma. The mountains bled water, and every drop was headed straight into the concrete channel Brenda had built like a fuse leading to her own front door. By the second week of March, Cottonwood Creek was roaring again. But it wasn't the calm, babbling creek my grandfather designed. It was an angry torrent. The concrete trench didn't let the water spread out naturally like before. It funneled everything into a single, narrow stream, a pressurized pipe with nowhere to breathe. I walked down to the edge early one morning, measuring flow velocity with my old surveyor's rod. The numbers were terrifying. "Martha," I said, "this isn't a creek anymore. It's a loaded gun." The next day, my phone rang before sunrise. It was Edwin Kowalski. His voice trembled. "Dale, she's losing her mind. Brenda, she's saying you are a terrorist. She's filing restraining order. She says you're dangerous." I almost laughed. Dangerous? She's the one who turned a mountain creek into a weapon. But she was desperate. That afternoon, a sheriff's deputy delivered legal papers. Brenda had filed for an emergency restraining order, claiming I'd been stalking and threatening HOA members. She even used photos of me measuring the water as evidence. The court date? March 22nd, the same week the National Weather Service predicted peak flooding. It was her final move. Tie me up in court so I couldn't document what was about to happen. Except she forgot something. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Kate Morrison, the environmental attorney from the University of Colorado, had officially taken over my case. She walked into my workshop carrying a binder the size of a cinder block and said, "We're about to end this." Kate coordinated everything like a military operation. We had real-time flood data from Dr. Angela Rodriguez at Colorado State, financial forensics from Sarah, and recorded evidence of Brenda's bribes, threats, and secret HOA meetings. Even the FBI and EPA were circling. By March 21st, Brenda's empire was cracking. Half the HOA board had resigned. Homeowners were demanding answers. Her husband had quietly left town, but still she doubled down, insisting the flooding reports were fake news. Then came March 22nd, the day everything broke. The federal courthouse in Denver was packed. Reporters filled the hallways, cameras flashing. The hearing for Brenda's restraining order had turned into a full-blown legal showdown. Judge Martha Blackwood presided, a woman known for making corporate lawyers sweat bullets. Brenda arrived wearing pearls and panic. I showed up with a folder full of truth. Kate's opening statement was calm and lethal. "Your Honor, this case isn't about personality conflicts. It's about fraud, environmental destruction, and retaliation against a homeowner who dared to protect the law." Then she hit play on the recordings. Brenda's voice filled the courtroom, clear as mountain air. "If you don't take the money, Dale, I'll ruin your wife's career. I'll make sure everyone in this valley thinks you're dangerous." The gallery gasped. Brenda's lawyer went white as printer paper. Then Sarah presented the financial documents. Proof of $87,000 siphoned from HOA accounts into companies Brenda secretly owned. The judge's eyebrows climbed higher with each page. And just when Brenda thought it couldn't get worse, Dr. Rodriguez took the stand. She explained how the concrete channel amplified flood risk by 400%. She showed real-time graphs, satellite images, and predicted water velocity charts. "Your Honor," she said, "during peak runoff, which is happening right now, water pressure in that concrete channel will exceed safe limits. It's already causing structural instability downstream." The courtroom phones started buzzing simultaneously. News alerts, live helicopter footage. The judge looked up. "Is this live?" Kate nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Cottonwood Creek is flooding." Every eye turned to the TV monitor. On screen, water surged through the concrete channel like a freight train. The stream overflowed, ripping through manicured lawns and backyard fences. Brenda's white Tesla floated past her front porch like a dead swan. The reporter's voice cracked. "We're live over Willowbrook Estates, where floodwaters are pouring into several high-value homes. Experts say the newly constructed concrete channel appears to be the cause, redirecting runoff directly into the subdivision." The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of rushing water from the speakers. Brenda broke first. "He did this!" she screamed, pointing at me. "He planned this flood. He's trying to destroy me!" The judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed through the room. "Enough, Mrs. Hartwell. Sit down." But Brenda didn't. She kept shouting about conspiracies, environmental terrorists, and rigged systems until federal agents entered the courtroom, FBI and EPA enforcement, serving her with additional warrants. Fraud, bribery, environmental crimes, witness intimidation, racketeering. By the end of the day, Brenda Hartwell was in handcuffs. Judge Blackwood ruled decisively in my favor. The HOA was ordered to remove every inch of illegal concrete, pay for full creek restoration, cover $750,000 in damages and attorney fees, and permanently return my family's water rights to protected status. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Someone asked how it felt to win. I looked straight into the lens and said, "Justice sounds like running water." 6 months later, Cottonwood Creek is alive again. The concrete's gone. Volunteers from Trout Unlimited, local veterans and college students helped rebuild the natural channel. We planted willow trees, shaped new gravel beds, and watched trout return to spawn where they hadn't in years. The air smells like clean mud and wildflowers again, not diesel and dust. The community changed too. The same neighbors who once ignored me now wave from their porches. Kids fish in the creek. We host a festival every spring, the Cottonwood Creek Celebration, honoring my grandfather's legacy and the power of standing your ground. Brenda? She's living in Florida now, banned from real estate, serving out her probation. Her old house was sold at a loss after the new buyers spent a fortune repairing flood damage. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Martha and I sit by the water with coffee mugs in hand. The creek hums softly, like it's thanking us for letting it breathe again. "Funny, isn't it?" she says. "All she wanted was control. And the water took it back," I reply, "because that's the thing about nature and justice. You can bury them for a while under concrete and greed, but eventually, both find their way home."